This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
All right, folks, I am going to call to order this meeting of the Easthampton Planning Board for Tuesday, March 21st, 2023. First item on the agenda is public speak. Is there anyone here who would like to speak to anything that is not on the agenda? We'll have time to discuss agenda items. Nothing in the room. Eli, anybody online looking?
Nope.
All right, so next item up is planning board minutes for February 7th, 2023.
Motion to approve the meeting minutes. Second.
All right, voting to approve. Oh, before we are recording this, and Danny Hartman is remote. Danny, you can hear us all right? All right, so voting on the February 7th meeting minutes, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Danny, can I get an aye? You're muted still.
Aye.
All right, next up is minutes for March 7th, 2023 meeting.
I move to approve those minutes. With one, just a quick thing. Danny's name, her last name was spelled differently, but so just make sure that we're going to add the end Hartman for the future, but it's nothing that's major. I just noticed it in a couple of minutes, but that's it. That's
Thanks, Chris. All right, voting to approve the March 7th, 2023 meeting minutes. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, moving right along, we have the continued public hearing for Tasty Top Development LLC, two site plan approvals and a special permit, 93, 95, 97 Northampton Street. So since our last meeting, we've got a peer review of the traffic and we've received a report. I'm wondering if our peer reviewer traffic person is here. Could you be so kind as to come up and just give a brief overview of your analysis here? I don't want to put you on the spot right off the bat, but I am. So we've obviously had a chance to read over what you prepared, but just so everyone at home and in the room that might not have had a chance to look at it, you can, as much or as little as you want to sort of walk through this. And if the applicants had a copy of this, right?
Correct.
Yes, great. Thank you.
Evening. My name is Rick Bryant. I'm with Stantec Consultant out of Northampton, and the city asked us to offer our technical expertise in traffic engineering, work that I've been doing for over 40 years now, to help inform you folks in your decision-making process. So we were given the traffic report prepared by the applicant. It gave it a review and submitted some written comments dated March 16. And as stated, some of you've seen those. I won't go through all the details, but just give you an overview and some of the highlights on the specifics. In general, the report meets applicable standards in terms of getting us a start into the review process, and does a pretty good job of evaluating existing conditions. Actually includes two sets of traffic counts to help evaluate existing conditions. But we find that it needs to go a lot further. What's the report today is help you folks understand the impacts. Obviously, what was submitted is called the traffic impact study. So, how much traffic is this going to generate? Where is it going to go? And what does it do to the operations of the intersections? And what we know already from the studies that's been done is that this project generates a significant amount of traffic, and it has significant impacts on the intersections out on Northampton Street, both at its driveway and the signal north of the site and the signal south of the site that we're in the site. And the numbers in our report demonstrate that, and it sort of stops there and says we need to work with the city and the state to figure this out. So that's where they left off, and what we've tried to do is give them a little roadmap where they may need to go to work with you and Mass DOT, who owns the road, to address these impacts that they've already identified. And from our perspective, it's important that at the end of the day, you understand what needs to be done on the roadway system to handle the added traffic. When is it going to get done, and who's going to pay for it? And I understand it's difficult for an applicant to talk about these things, particularly early in a process, because the applicant doesn't want to be told what you have to pay for all of it. We understand that can be burdensome. Some of the problems that are out there exist already, and not simply due to this project. But we do know that the state has a project underway for this segment of roadway, and that's actually beneficial, I think, to all parties. The state is aware of issues. The state has committed money to help fix those things. So now it's just a matter of figuring out what's the fix going to look like, what's the timing to get in place, and we would expect some cost sharing between the applicant and the state to see that things get done in a timely fashion. The project may proceed, the development project may proceed the state project, in which case there may be some, we can't rely on the state entirely to do what needs to happen in a timely manner. So that's the gist of our letter is asking the applicant to help, advance that conversation a bit more and figure out what has to be done. And some of the specifics, to start the site driveway, they reported operations of their driveway F. And if you know level service terminology, and those who don't, us traffic engineers try to simplify things for others to understand us by saying, operated level service A, things flow pretty smoothly, not a lot of delay. And then we go through the letters of the alphabet and we stop at F, which doesn't necessarily mean failure, but it means that delays are longer. If it's a traffic light, you're not going to get through. On the first green you see, you might have to wait 1 or 2 more additional cycles. So there's that range. And again, when we talk about this project having significant impacts, some of those letter grades drop 1 or 2 boxes due to the project impact. So the driveway is projected to be at level surface F. It's an unsignalized driveway, which means Northampton Street traffic is going to continue to do what it's doing, but the people trying to get out are going to experience long waits. And hopefully they don't take risks because they're waiting. But that's something that needs to be addressed. There's mention of a signal as a solution at some point, and that's a perfectly acceptable solution. What's missing in that the signal itself, we don't think solves the problem, because with the signal, what their analysis is showing that you have a very long backup coming southbound on Northampton Street, almost filling back up to the Florence Street light. And what that probably needs is a left turn lane for traffic that's queued up to turn left into the site. And the question we have is that feasible? Adding a turn lane means adding pavement. The edge of pavement gets pushed out. If there's sidewalks and bike lanes and everything else that are under contemplation for the state project, at some point you run out of what we call right-of-way, the land that's allocated to the street. If you need to go outside that right-of-way and deal with private property owners, now you have a real headache and could deem the widening infeasible. So that's kind of a threshold issue to address, and I would suggest the applicant look at that as soon as possible, because if that left turn lane belongs there, and you can't fit it in the layout, then you're going to see some very negative impacts in terms of operations. The similar kind of issues were flagged up at Florence Street. The left turn lane, if you're going north on Northampton Street, you want to turn left to go into Florence. That turn lane tends to fill up already, and the study's showing a lot more traffic going into that turn lane. So that turn lane may need to be made longer. And we don't know that there's space and room to do that. We don't know who's going to do it, when it's going to get done, how's it going to get paid for. So again, questions to be answered there. Down at West Street, overall, it's a signalized intersection, but again, they're showing long delays, traffic having a hard time getting through. There's a turn lane there already. Maybe that needs to be longer. Maybe there needs to be some other widening there to get an extra through lane. That one's a bit more challenging if you're adding a through lane through the roadway. Elsewhere, like at the driveway, you're adding that turn lane. That's kind of a short section of roadway that's impacted. But if you're doing something on West Street, that's more problematic. And again, talking to the state, getting some of their input, what might ultimately happen out here would be good. And again, timing is an issue, and we could sit waiting for the state to do its thing. But the applicant is here. The applicants generate a lot of data, a lot of analysis, and I would say that maybe the applicant can help push this process along and kind of inform the state early on, kind of things that we think are needed to support the project. So that, again, that's the overview. We go on with a couple more pages. Every traffic engineer has their own approach, is going to look at the data a little differently, perhaps. There's half a dozen things in here that I would have done different than they did, and we're just suggesting that to the extent there needs to be more analysis to nail down what these improvements might be, that they maybe look at some of the things we suggested on how the existing traffic they used. They did a count in September. They came back, I guess, because the count was questioned. They did counts in January. They used the January counts to the September count. But January tends to be a lower volume month. They cited some statistics that say, no, it isn't. I'd say often it is. So, might look at that. Some of the trip rates that are applied in the project, the residential piece particularly, looks like maybe they're a bit low. So it's those kinds of things that we'll move the numbers a little bit one way or the other. But I think we're all better off if we kind of agree on those assumptions in the next round of analysis.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone has some, but one thing that was really interesting to me, and I think it first came to light when it was brought up by some of the abutters, perhaps some of the certain things that were spoken, was the mountain view offset. And you speak about that in here a little bit. I think it's about 100 feet off as proposed right now in the driveway. And I'd like just to understand a little bit better. In here you suggest, and I think you would suggest moving the mountain view side, which seemed to me, maybe I misread what you said here. That seems difficult, because now you're involving the other side. I would think you'd move this driveway to match. Was it your intent to suggest that it should be done, or it's beneficial to move this driveway to no longer be 100 feet offset, but rather to match? Or do you think mountain view should move, or what's your suggestion?
What's beneficial is to create a four-way intersection. If you have an offset, and even without a light, as I mentioned, I think from our perspective, it looks like a left turn lane is warranted. Cars queued in that left turn lane could block the Cernak driveway. With a light, goes red, immediately starts building queues, come block the driveway. So the way to address that is to line up the two driveways. They can both use the light, and then the queues aren't blocking one another. And how that gets done, I don't have a preference, but that's where we should end up. And it may be, there's a somewhat vacant parcel across from this development site, and I haven't talked to Cernak. I don't know what their plans are, but if there's some redevelopment anticipated, maybe it makes sense to move their future driveway to that location opposite the proposed development driveway. If that doesn't make sense on that side of the road, then moving, and it's only on paper at this point, they could move this driveway to line up with Mountain View. So I don't know the answer at this point. I just believe that the solution should be to get a four-way.
I just want to probe just a tiny bit further on that. I think intellectually it makes sense from a layman that would be better putting the beacon there. You could do more with a signalized light. If they were merged, it would affect both ways. But what are the real tangible effects to that? Like, give me a sense of if they're not put together, how will that be a negative?
As I said, if there's a light at the project in the development driveway, you're 100 feet away, that's about 4 car lengths. As soon as that light goes red, in 10, 15 seconds, the southbound traffic on Northampton Street is going to build a queue, and it's going to prevent anyone from turning left into Mountain View or turning left out of Mountain View. And that's a problem that the Mountain View people are going to have to contend with. It won't be that way all times a day. And to be honest, and to be fair, the study that's been done and the discussion we have is focuses on commuter peak hours. It's how's it work the worst time of day? And so we're talking about issues getting in and out at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Might not be so bad 9 o'clock at night, but there'll be times a day where commuters are on the road trying to get home quickly, and somebody's trying to make a left into the Cernak driveway, and maybe they're coming north on Northampton Street. They're at the new light. The light goes green, and they go 100 feet. Now they have to stop because there's somebody waiting to turn left into the Mountain View Drive. They can't get there because the southbound queue is blocked.
One more piece. I actually might need a lot from the board here, but I remember reading something. Is that the road, Mountain View, that is an unaccepted road? Is that what I read about that? Yes. Can someone explain exactly what that means?
I think this is not a public way. It's a private way. But it is used as not only as access and egress, but I mean, for example, we use that as part of the circulation plan for fire ants when we approved their special permit, right? It's a sort of a one-way loop. So it's definitely considered a key component of that, as well as those other property owners along the side of it. But as far as I understand it, I think that's what came up in that special permit. I don't think that was ever made a public way by the city.
Thank you.
Planning board members, any other questions at this point? Rick? Danny, I don't want to forget you online. This obviously isn't your only chance to comment or question, but if you want to, you can.
No, I'm good, but thank you.
Okay. So I guess probably my thought is to hear from the applicant about this. I realize we won't have this a few days, but I'm wondering if you have any initial thoughts, any sort of how this sort of course is being charted and what we think is a reasonable next step from your perspective. I don't know if that's you or Carrie or whoever you want to address this, but.
I'll get up and maybe I'll turn it over to Carrie for a little.
Great.
Frank Demarinis, president of Tasty Top. Since the last meeting, I just wanted to kind of just update you a little bit on we received comments from the peer review. I want to say it was Friday, so we haven't had a chance to formally respond to it. So obviously we're going to continue this hearing to give us a chance to respond to that. We also recently received, I think it was yesterday, comments from the city engineer. Again, it was literally 48 hours or so, and we're planning on responding, and we've already started addressing each one of those topics from the city engineer. And so for the next meeting, we will have those addressed. We also approved the extension for 120 days with your board, with approval to Jeff for that. And in addition, there's been talks about the EIR, and we retain the services of GZA to file EIR with the state of Massachusetts. EIR is the MEPA review. Okay. We're mostly waiting until local permits are through before we go down that long, lengthy road. There's no sense of going down that road if this board was not to approve.
And just for the audience, EIR is Environmental Impact Report.
Yes.
So that will be assessing the impacts to the site from an environmental standpoint.
Well, it's a certificate per se. It assesses it, or it's more of a notification to any and all agencies. And we've already contacted the most critical ones, you guys being one of them, and conservation and historical and some of the other boards. So, and we have letters from just about everybody.
So my understanding is that you notified these state boards, right? And then they sort of determine if there's further investigation or work that's needed, or if it doesn't rise to a level that requires further work. Is that fair, generally?
Fair to say. Certificates are mostly a notification that raises to the board to like make sure that everybody is aware of the project and gets their chance to
speak now.
Comment,
Yeah. Okay.
But like I said, I want to say the most important boards are yourselves, the conservation and Mass Highway.
Okay.
And we've contacted a lot of the other ones. So we're well on our way with that process. I think Don can also help us understand Mountain View. He's the project attorney and he did a great deal of research. It is not a public way. It's a access point. And it was recorded in 1912, I want to say, but Don can be more articulate with the legality of what that is. At this point, it's a driveway that serves us 2 businesses or 3. And I also wanted to make a point quickly that a lot of the changes that are going to happen, or not a lot of the changes, but again, Mass Highway is the steward over that road and is going to have the final determination what improvements we make on that. Mass Highway will not entertain a curb cut permit until Concom and Conservation approve this. So we're kind of putting the cart ahead of the horse a little bit here. So any approval you have is going to obviously be contingent on obtaining Mass Highway approval. So the location of the driveway was strategically placed to accommodate any and all suggestions that they make by placing in the center of ours. So we're prepared to give land to the right of way to Mass Highway to add that turning lane or add one on the other side. So we're ready for that. But if we shove the driveway to the south towards Starbucks, making that intersection harder, and I'll try to line it with another driveway across the street, now I don't have the land to add a turning lane. And our next meeting will be more ready to articulate that to you with a concept drawing of a proposed intersection layout. But so we're really planning ahead for any and all options that the state throws at us.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about this before, right? There's there's the city, and now here we've got Mass DOT, which probably has more power than either of us and the other features here. But we're trying to figure out what we can do as far as, if we're going down this path and we're going to condition approval, but also not wanting to just do everything. If anything changes, you have to come back, because that doesn't really help you very much either, right? So I think what we're trying to think about is, are there things, can we solve the bigger picture problems? And if we can, what can we check off now versus making you come back in this hypothetical, after DOT sort of starts making their concrete steps too. So there's obviously a lot of moving parts.
It's a lot of moving parts, but I think, Mass DOT has the final say with this,
right.
and it can come, whatever they require, and then any intersectional plans and light determinations, we'll CC the board on. You can make that a part of your approvals, and you feel like the modifications aren't within the limits of what the approval is, we can come back and ask for a modification for that.
Right, so that's what, because we don't want to, at least I personally, I don't want to just, delegate all of our authority to Mass DOT to approve whatever project, right? We have certain things that we might be more concerned about than they are. So I think that's where we're sort of trying to thread the needle here on what sort of, buffers can we put on here, and realize that this isn't something that everyone in this room can decide on today, even if we all wanted to and could. Like, there's a major third party there. So
Right.
We're just gonna have to, I think, sort of kind of,
And we're trying to balance your requirements, your conditions with what the states are going to be too,
Yep.
and give us the most versatility to appease them. And the location of the driveway is exactly that, a location to appease them. Like I said, we move it 100 feet to the north, we will no longer have a chance to add that lane in.
And is it still your understanding that you basically need at least like a conditional special permit to sort of move the state towards this project? Or is this something where if we wait a little longer, there's going to be more concrete discussions with DOT?
They won't start the review until there's local land use permits.
Okay.
They just won't. We've ran into this time and time with them, because they've learned from the past. They issue a curb cut permit and then the local board denies the project.
Right. So
they spent all that engineering time, resources, evaluation, all that staff time, and reviewing something that was fictitious.
So then, the only problem there, and thinking about this from 30,000 feet, right, is hypothetically we could say, put a condition that says that the intersection must be across from Mountain View, and you can get your conditional approval, and then you'd have to come back if it wasn't, right? And it would be dealing with further hearings after the DOT project. I don't know a way around that sort of a
I
concept.
suggest, and I think you're spot on with it, but I suggest when you have a chance to review and you come back in the next meeting, we try to find conditions that are exactly what you say, a little more generic. I'm really interested in, the offset, really interested in that entry lane, and it seems like you're pursuing that entry lane. And I'd like to see how it's not feasible. And maybe we condition an entry lane, will be pursued. And if that doesn't get done with Mass DOT, I think it's appropriate that we come back and say, okay, is this still going to work? But if we're talking about smaller things involved in how that happens, exactly where the pedestrian lane is, stuff like that, bike lanes and stuff, which we know Mass DOT will pursue, we don't necessarily need to condition that stuff. So maybe a few higher level trip bombs.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to start thinking about that sort of language for sure.
So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Don to explain the legal stance of where Mountain View is. Like I said, it's not a public way. Sure, it is a driveway, and to design this project based on a driveway is probably not the appropriate. Sure. One overview. Yeah. Thank you.
John Abel, I'm the attorney for the applicant. I have an office here in Easthampton. I think what I can do is help you understand the current status of what Mountain View Street is. I think the issue that's going to arise is the potential impact of traffic as we look forward and how that's going to play out with our traffic studies. And I think we'll work towards that goal down the road as we get a better sense of how these traffic studies are going to go. But currently, it was a subdivision plan recorded at the Registry of Deeds showing 300 plus lots, all 50 by 100 feet behind the Cernak property. Now, part of the Cernak properties, multiple owners, was a part of this subdivision plan. Back in 1912, we didn't have the subdivision control law, which was subsequently enacted. I don't know the specific date in Easthampton, generally early 1950s, and then have to be adopted by the various municipalities. So prior to that time, if there was a plan on record that showed lots and ways, it was accepted as a subdivision, and there were certain rights that were grandfathered to that. Oftentimes, when we set up a subdivision, we convey the lot, but we reserve the ownership or the fee interest or the right to develop the road in the owner, so that eventually they turn that over to the municipality and we have a public way. In this instance, they just sold the lots, and in doing so, they created a situation. There's a statute chapter, the site to it currently, it's called the derelict fee statute. Because that happened a lot, especially in the early days. And so we had these little strips of land that we didn't know who owned them. So the legislature came in and established the rule of law that said if you convey a piece of property in a subdivision and show that it's along this way, then, but there's nothing there. The owner of that lot is going to now own up to the midway point of that street. Now there's a lot of different exceptions and lots and things, but if you've got two lots on either side of the street, each lot owns the halfway up. However, there are also easement rights that are associated with any of the lots that are in that subdivision, so that they have rights of access over that, but the fee ownership. And there has been nothing done. Groveland, Lawndale, Wendell are all the streets that are a little bit southerly of that, have all gone through the process of being accepted, but a number of the streets in that project, including Mountain View, they've never addressed the issue of presenting it to the municipality to become a public way. So right now it is the ownership of that land rests with the abutters as they go up. The other abutters in that project have certain easement rights. How far those extend, what the potential of those are, that's to be determined, but there are theoretically there. There's also the issue of the status of that subdivision, in that most of the lots have been consolidated into ownership by one of the, Mr. Gall, who sadly passed away, but one of the, had consolidated some ownership, and whether or not the subdivision rights to carry through, we'll leave that for another day. So right now it's privately owned property. Each of the owners have the right to easement rights, and associated with those easement rights are the right to improve it, as the Cernak family has done for a certain distance off. And so they are using that. They don't own it, or each one's up to the middle, but there are easement rights that they can use. And those easement rights are being used now in a fashion called Mountain View Street. I think, as I said, the question before us is going to be, how does that impact future development, and how critical is it to plan for that as we go through this project, or whether it's critical at all?
How much do we care what the legal status that is, right? Like, we're looking at it as a source of traffic. Like, if the situation was reversed, no one would care that the driveway at Tasty Top Development was a private road and not a public road, right? We're just looking at traffic. I mean, there's clearly businesses that, like I said, it was part of the circulation plan and the special permit for fire ants when we approved it a year or two ago. But I mean, I'm not sure that we care what there's driveways. I mean, Starbucks, right? It's a driveway. It's going to be a source of traffic, but it's not a public way. We still consider it.
One exception I'd like to toss in, will Mass DOT work it into the project should that be something that we push for if it's not an accepted way? When I asked the question earlier, I wanted to know because Mass DOT is open, so I want to see if that's a barrier for them.
Mm-hmm.
There are curb cuts associated with private driveways. So the fact that it's a public way doesn't necessarily, whether it's a public way or not, doesn't necessarily impact it. Whether DOT has a level of criteria that they give to public ways as opposed to private driveways. We haven't really had the opportunity to go through the curb cut process ourselves. It's been suggested that there is a licensed curb cut there. I don't know the nature of whether that's true or not. It's been suggested. I think the reason why we worry about what the status is right now, it's a finite driveway. There's been some suggestion raised by some of the public comment about the fact that there are other lots. We need to make sure that we understand if there's potential further use to buffer that position. But you're right. Right now, I don't think that that's a critical matter.
Can I address that?
I just want to toss a suggestion. And it sounds to me, who's to say really, that it's going to come down to a difference between the impact of having an entry lane or lining the roads. And what I would like is at the next meeting or sometime in the future, if you can make sure put together and give us some numbers of what you think the difference in impact would be.
Sure. Well, we can try to do that to the best of our ability, but you're exactly right. Mass DOT is going to take consideration of driveway curb cut. And right now, by pushing the driveway towards Starbucks, which Starbucks generates probably 10 times, if not more than that, what's coming out of the Mountain View right now. So by you mandating us to go across from Mountain View, then you now all of a sudden cause a traffic issue somewhere else by bringing two curb cuts close together like that on the same side. And this is something that Mass DOT is experts at analyzing and making suggestions. And if they tell us, we'll move it. But if then we move it and then we don't have the ability to put a left turn lane in, where are we? And I really think this is something that we need to leave up to the professionals, to the traffic engineers.
I know, but that's who told us this is an issue that we should work towards solving. It's those traffic experts we just hired, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
I think it's going to agree with me that the traffic engineers that are reviewing this are very qualified with our traffic engineers to work through this. And the traffic engineers that are reviewing this are at Mass DOT.
Oh yeah,
and he'll be the first one to tell us that they're not going to review this project until we get planning board approval. And I just think it's inappropriate for a board to mandate where it's going to be and pretty much tie our hands so we have nothing to be able to work with the state.
Well, to be fair, I mean, I think anything that we would do along those lines would be that this is a requirement, and if it's not something that is met, you would come back to modify it, and we would deal with what Mass DOT has told you to do. I mean, that happens all the time for us. I mean, not on this scale, but like we often will do conditional approval like that. And we did that most recently, I remember with the co-op, right, where they moved the city street a little bit, coming on River 10. So I don't think it's like an all or nothing, but I do think that, like I said before, I'm not sure Mass DOT has all the same considerations that we do and the same concerns. So I know that they're going to do a fully competent job, and they know highway curb cuts better than any of us do, but I don't know that it's going to be all the same considerations, which is why I'm hoping we can pick some general bumpers, going forward, that we try to fit this in. And if we have to do more back and forth, we do.
Carrie looks like she's trying to chime in. So
sure.
Carrie's the traffic engineer.
Yep, that's great. Thanks, Eli. Hi, Carrie.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, I thought Mr. Bryan's suggestions were reasonable, and, we can come back with some ideas about, what a concept could look like and what the, maybe even slide it around a little bit and show more than one and actually quantify some of those things. And I think there were some suggestions with respect to the analysis that Mr. Bryan made too that may change kind of how we think about things. The one that stuck out to me was he mentioned the trip distribution and just the number of vehicles that we're putting on Florence Street and also on West Street. So those kind of things I think would then also, have a ripple impact in how we're looking at the impacts. So, I think we'll have better answers and more answers. And yes, ultimately Mass DOT is the one that has to issue the curb cut permit. And if there's a traffic signal, they have to issue a traffic signal permit as well. So there's a whole access permit process that has to be gone through. And some of that also gets started in the MIPA process that Frank described as well, that they'll start to look more in detail in MIPA as well. So I feel like, we have some good direction from the peer review letter, and we'll come back to you with some more information.
That's excellent, Carrie. So there's obviously a lot of other things we got to get through, but my first question is, assuming you're going to respond to this, which is a lot of material, what do you think a timeline is for when we could expect to hear back from you folks in response to the letter? So I don't want to bump this out, 2 weeks and then you're asking to continue again or something like that. So let's think reasonably.
Yeah, I know. So there's a sort of complicating factor, although, we can certainly mitigate this, in that I'm going on vacation on Thursday for 2 weeks. So I will not be here for your next meeting, but that doesn't mean staff can't continue to be working on it. So we had talked about possibly 2 weeks, but I would feel more comfortable because I feel like there's a lot of things and details to work through. And I want to make sure that we, get them all lined up so that we can present them to you coherently, and so that potentially Mr. Bryant can also take a look at them and, give you his opinion as well, since he's your expert. So maybe it would be 4 weeks, would be a more reasonable thing to shoot for, just to make sure that we're, again, having everything lined up and coherent.
I certainly think that sounds reasonable, especially like you said, it's always better if we could hear from both you folks and Mr. Bryant at that next meeting. He'll have had a chance hopefully to digest it and give feedback. So that might in the long run be a quicker process anyways. Jeff, did you have something?
I don't want to speak for Mr. Brandt, but in the proposal that we have, I identified a request for 2 weeks from receipt of new information. So I would like to try to use that as the benchmark, unless Rick wants to offer something shorter than that. But if that's the applicant's preparing information takes 4 weeks, the peer reviewer is here, so we can speak to, but had outlined 2 weeks for review, then would be the meeting to discuss it all. So I think
is reasonable. And obviously it depends on what you get. It's hard to tell what you have to review when you haven't seen it yet.
When we have to put in a contract, we ask for 2 weeks. In the real world, just, we have a day or two in advance of the meeting to look at something, and I have the availability. We can respond faster.
Well, I mean, it sounds like Carrie's hoping that it wouldn't take the full 4 weeks anyway. And I think it's in the applicant's best interest to give it to you with enough time so that, again, we can sort of cross off 2 things at once in 4 weeks. But, circumstances may change when we get closer, which isn't the end of the world. But I think that's probably
I do have a vacation in April, so I guess it's a
Julie vacation.
like what would be the date?
What's that?
Pretty sure it's the 18th, just checking.
Yeah, 18th of April
would be
would a month out, and then another 2 weeks for him, right? So isn't that actually the 1st of May?
Rules are 8.
I mean, we were talking about doing it at 4 weeks, which would be the 18th. But if that's when you're gone too, we're not making people move vacations for this. So May 2nd would be the first weekend. Oh yeah. When's your vacation?
let me, I can check my calendar. Doing some volunteer work preparing taxes for seniors, so I know that ends at April 15th.
Okay.
We plan to go in after I'm done with that obligation. I just don't remember the exact start.
All right.
So
That's fine.
my folks here, I'll check my calendar.
Okay, we don't need to deal with the exact date at this moment either. Planning board members have any other questions or comments about where we are and what we've heard so far
And the traffic,
on the traffic?
I think that it's a huge issue, and when they get back and give us more, it'd be a good time to proceed.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Okay, so I do want to open this up to people. I mean, obviously, we are now in another meeting where we're dealing with the traffic, but if people have other issues that we haven't talked about, if you want to raise them, that's fine too.
Can I ask the chair?
Yeah.
So the last two meetings, there was a gentleman that
I know, I was-
cut off both times. He's here. Could he first?
I'm looking, but I didn't see him come in. But we'll,
Okay.
I keep
He's not here.
but thank you. There's somebody else. Jeff, did you have something?
I mentioned talking about site visits, but I think I can go after a public speak.
Yeah, I mean, I can just give a blurb on site visits. So we looked into the idea of sort of doing the open meeting site visit thing. I think that's going to be unwieldy. It's hard to both comply with open meeting law and the ADA and all the other things. So I think when I talked to the planning department about it, we talked about doing multiple meetings of no more than 2 members. That way we can be on site and it'll be a manageable crowd. It's not a meeting, we won't be deliberating, and we'll try to get that coordinated before the next meeting. I will handle it that way.
And we discussed that in terms of guidance from the Attorney General's office as a way to make sure that the board is complying with the rules and gets to see the site and then is prepared at the next meeting to talk about it.
Right. Okay, so public comment. Anybody have any comments or questions at this point? I see hand gestures. Who's going?
You said yes for all of us, so you go first.
I'll go first. Because nobody else is jumping in. Hi, my name is Rick Cernak, Stratford House Properties, 100 Northampton Street, and the one improved property on Mountain View Street, the cinder block building back, the garage building and shop. Thank you, Mr. Zarvis, for bringing up a lot of questions about Mountain View. I really appreciate that. One of the things I want to present to you, and one of the questions you asked is Mass DOT going to accept something like that on a street that is not accepted by the city, in other words. Stop and Shop proposed us dozens and dozens of different designs going throughout the planning process, which was lengthy. So Harry remembers that, I'm sure. Their final plan, Stop and Shop's final plan, was approved by the city, accepted by me. My sister right here was my business partner, and I believe it was accepted by Mass DOT because they were involved. So the only thing that was really changed, and it has changed, that may affect this would be where does Starbucks come into play on that? I'll leave that to the people who know better than I do. I want to make some points here. I think this is a very interesting project. It's huge. I looked at this and I said, you know, you get, I think it's like 10 buildings here that are residential. The scale of this, I don't think people realize in the public. Some people do. But this is, if you were to stack these buildings, one on top of another, you would have a 30-plus story building. That's huge. I mean, you know, we're not going to do that in Easthampton. No. It doesn't fit in with the current use and all that, but it's enormous. When I had property subdivided in the past, I dropped dozens and dozens of concepts before I even go to the planning board or whatever. And finally, I'd submit a plan that I liked most. The board would weigh in, neighbors would weigh in, and then I'd adjust the plans accordingly. All my plans were eventually accepted. I'm not talking about Easthampton, by the way. I only want Easthampton, which is very minor. Tasty Top Development applied with the Easthampton Planning Board in late November for a special permit and site plan approvals. It's now 4 months later. They've only shown plans with their access road aligned to nothing, as far as I'm concerned. I look forward to seeing their plans for the alignment with Mountain View Street, because I'm sure they've thought about that. In fact, they've said they thought about that, and I'm glad they have. Again, I like the project in general. I just don't like the way it's laid out exactly, for the reasons that I just mentioned. I did some video, some of it's posted, some of it's yet to be posted on your website. And I actually went out on March 10th and did some video from across the street from Mountain View Street and walked down to the first residential property, Danielle owns, and then went over to as far as Burger King and did a half an hour videos. We had little clips for the most part. And until I did that, I didn't get a real sense. I know I've been stuck in traffic coming out of Mountain View Street before, but I didn't have a sense of what it really looks like for gaps and what it really looks like for getting out in general out of Mountain View. Unless if I measure the gaps, I measure the time in getting out in swear words. Okay? You know, 5 afterwards means it's pretty bad. Okay, 1 is it's okay. You know, maybe 20 seconds as opposed to a minute and a half, but it gets bad. And there's a potential for development, not only on our properties, my cousin Keith's property, which is for sale. That has the most immediate potential, but also properties behind us. And planning, you know, this is your job, and I wouldn't want your job, but this is, you got to kind of look at the future. And Mr. Gall, now I believe it is Matt and his mother own the property. They're developers, and they own a lion's share of the property behind us and immediately behind us. So something to consider. That's about all I have to say for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, I did see a David Loring. My eyes are usually good for reading that.
Yeah, you got it.
All right.
Yes, good evening. I was hired at the request of 102 Northampton Street, LLC. I am a vice president with Power Corporation, professional engineer with over 35 years working on land development and state DOT projects and all manner of this type of municipal infrastructure. We were hired at the request, as I said, of Northampton Street, LLC to look at the traffic and really the development as a whole. I don't want to spend time repeating comments that were made regarding the traffic study. We did look at it briefly, and we're in general agreement with the comments that have previously been made by Rick of Stantec and those of Howard Stein Hudson, excuse me. I did want to just emphasize a couple of points. When we talk of the traffic out there, one of the things that was not mentioned, but it is heavy. Under this development, the queues are going to extend well over 1,000 feet. And that means they're going to be close to interfering with the operations at Florence Road intersection. So access to private properties and abutting properties along that corridor are going to be severely impacted. I should also say we did submit a letter, although it did come in late, so the planning board members have not yet had a chance to see that. So I don't want to run through all the points we did raise. One of the comments, questions I should say, that was raised by a planning board member, I apologize, I didn't get the name, but the negative impacts of having an offset intersection. It will lead to a couple of things, potentially longer cycle times. It could change the phasing at that intersection, and it results in less efficient movements. What that means is you're taking longer to pass the volume of traffic through that intersection as opposed to a right angle intersection, which would be directly opposing Mountain View Street. So you have a longer delay as cars have to come out, turn, and then turn again to make it through the intersection. We haven't talked a lot, and I haven't heard a lot of discussions about bike and pedestrian movements. I think there's a desire to see a greater consideration for those users of the roadways. There has been, I know, pedestrian incidents along this particular corridor, but with an offset intersection, you're increasing the time that it takes pedestrians to pass, as well as interrupting a bicyclist route. If a bicyclist, for example, going from west to east, now they have to create a jog, which again takes longer and it's more dangerous as they have to blend in with the movements of traffic as they make their way through an offset intersection. I also wanted to mention Another topic in traffic engineering that we often talk about with intersection is the number of conflict points. Those are the number of points within an intersection where there's the potential for an incident, be it pedestrian, bicyclist, and or motorist. With an offset intersection, you increase the number of conflict points, which makes it inherently less safe than one that would be a right angle type of intersection. So, we were strongly in favor of that right angle intersection, which would directly oppose Mountain View Street. That said, I think the plans can go a long way if we could see some concepts developing those improvements that need to be negotiated between the city, Mass DOT, and the abutting property owners to see what can be done out there with the inclusion of turning lanes and signals. As I said, I don't want to get into the other aspects of the traffic study itself. I think they did a very good job. And the changes are going to slightly change the numbers, but they're not going to change the big picture as we see it. One other thing is there really isn't a mechanism by which the traffic mitigation measures begin to kick in. As you look at this, I think it's tripped at phase 3. But what does that really mean in terms of counts? There should be some method to measure and gauge when those measures should be placed and constructed. So I think that's all I have to say at this point, but I did submit a letter as well for the planning board's consideration. Thank you. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to address them as well.
Thanks, David. I know there was someone else in here.
Good evening, Leslie Sarnak. I'm a manager of Beth Rental Properties, address 100 Northampton Street and the shop on Mountain Street. And I really just wanted to reinforce safety and the whole issue of bringing together Mountain View Street and the access road for the new development. My job right now, after my brother and I sold Sarnak Field, I now work for Hop Energy, which has several branches throughout the Northeast. And my job for them is to do research. And in the event of an incident, I work with the branch managers throughout the Northeast. So if there has been some sort of vehicle crash, that type of thing, that's what I do. And then I go work with the attorneys after that. The last thing I want to see is another accident out in front of the Sarnak Fuel building. There were just recently 2 deaths. I'm so very concerned about a misalignment here. Again, all about safety, the concern with pedestrians, bicyclists, there'll be kids in the neighborhood, there'll be cars, and there will be commercial vehicles. The commercial vehicles, the oil trucks, they do not start and stop on a dime. And if they try to pull out quickly, they carry a liquid load, which will shift. It's a bad mix if we don't design this well. Mr. Demarinis himself just said that Starbucks will generate approximately 10 times the amount of traffic out of their driveway from Mountain View Street. Well, we've calculated from Mountain View Street at peak times for alcohol for fire ants that the traffic generation is 80 to 100 cars. So Mr. Demarinis is saying that Starbucks will be 800 to 1,000 cars coming out of that driveway on top of all of this. I'm not sure whether Mr. Bryant, when he did his peer review, analyzed the traffic that would be generated from Starbucks or not, but keeping in mind that under the HSH review, it did not include, the traffic vehicle count did not include the cars from Starbucks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Sarnak, one of the owners of the abutting commercial property 102 Northampton Street. First of all, I'd like to say that I was pleased to see that the city of Easthampton's peer reviewer, Stantec Consulting Services, stating that, I quote, a concept plan should be prepared for the suggested improvements to help identify potential right-of-way and abutter impacts, unquote. And I just wanted to point out a couple of really kind of basic facts that stood out to me with the Howard, Stein, and Hudson traffic reviews. One being that the listing of the speed limit was listed at 40 miles per hour when we know it to be 35 miles per hour on this stretch of Northampton Street corridor. And then the same traffic engineer has performed the Starbucks traffic review, and the address for a Starbucks was listed at 113 Northampton Street, which is actually the address for Burger King. Something else I want to mention, during the planning board meeting in December of 2022, the planning board made a straightforward request of the applicant to clearly identify the abutting parcels on the opposite side of the street, including Mountain View, in the project plans. Not complying with this planning board request, regardless of how you label that street, is concerning, as this has a real and true impact on our abutting properties. And this not only impacts us as commercial abutters, but also the residential neighborhoods that will experience even more delays than they currently do with this access road closer to the residential neighborhoods, particularly on the closest residential street, Groveland Street. And then especially later on, once the access road becomes signalized at whatever point in time that occurs. As the owners of the abutting property, my family members and I have concerns regarding safety, efficiency, and flow at a new potentially signalized intersection that would be offset with Mountain View, where our renter, to repeat, fire ants was required by the city to have his customers exit onto Northampton Street. And also where my cousin's property at, Cernak Fuel Hop Energy have fuel trucks entering and exiting. Is it possible that the board requests the applicant to submit a design plan without offset of Mountain View Street? As businesses and properties contributing to and functioning within the city for nearly a century, we respectfully ask the planning board to consider our concerns. And just thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Lucille Kostick, 12 Plymouth Avenue. I have been a lifelong resident of Easthampton and have lived in the neighborhood next door to this proposed project for 53 years. My husband sat on this very board years ago. We are against this proposal for several reasons. Number one is the size and area that would be flat-topped and built upon. Our neighborhood is situated between Tasty Top property and the Manhan River, and many of us living here already get water in the basement with rainstorms and melting snow. We fear that the overdevelopment of that property will only increase our problem. I'm also a longstanding member of the Piscomic Conservation Trust, and I have great concern for the Manhan River, which abuts this proposed development. It was stated at an earlier meeting of this board that someone already filled in some vernal pools on this property. Sounds like the developer already has an infraction against him. How can we be sure that the brook, wetlands, and Manhan River will be protected? A great concern for us and everyone living along Northampton Street and on all of its side streets is the increase in traffic that this proposed project will produce. And I'm glad it's being addressed thoroughly. And Northampton Street, as it is, will not be able to handle it. We have already seen over the years the increase in traffic from the already existing businesses, Valley Medical, River Valley Co-op, and just being a gateway into and through the city. And there have been many accidents over the years. We already, for a long time now, have great difficulty getting out onto Northampton Street from our neighborhood. My husband and I love to take walks every day, weather permitting. From Florence Road to West Street, there are no crosswalks. It is very dangerous trying to cross that street. It was mentioned at the last planning board meeting that phase 1 does not warrant a traffic light at the entrance to the property. Does that mean there will be no safe crosswalk either? Very recently, within the past year or two, when it was just mentioned, an elderly couple tried crossing Northampton Street just a stone's throw from where the entrance will be for this proposed project. Both got killed. No one is here to represent them. I think if they were here, they would say, please put in a traffic light and crosswalk. Also, phase 1 is building a Roots childcare and education building and a gymnasium. When is it more important to make sure crossing that road is safe when many children are involved? Some may be walking to those two buildings. I personally know of a child that got killed on Northampton Street riding her bicycle years ago. Do we wait until a child gets killed again before installing a traffic light? The traffic is going to increase to perhaps 1,000 to 2,000 cars per day by the end of this project's construction. Not to mention all the construction equipment and big trucks in and out during the construction over 5 years or more. Please take under serious consideration the installation of a traffic light at the very start of planning the entrance to this development. Another concern we have in our immediate neighborhood is the emergency exit, which is visible on the plans for the end of Colonial Avenue. We feel that the street was not made for travel of fast-moving emergency vehicles with no sidewalks, and with small children living there, it would not be safe. But I do know that emergency vehicles have the right of way on any public street or alleyway or anywhere. But safety I'm most concerned about is, will this remain an emergency exit? Once they opened it up, we possibly could see the construction vehicles and trucks going in and out. And even after the project is done, will it still remain an emergency exit? That's a big question mark. And lots of people built their homes. In fact, there were some brand new condos just built at the end of that street, right by where that exit will be. And I'm sure they all bought because it's been a quiet, peaceful neighborhood, but not for long. I will end by saying that we are not against development, but feel this project is overkill in one area, a sensitive area for the environment. We know that the city needs affordable housing, but does this development really provide it? We feel that the mere size of it all will contribute to water and air pollution, traffic problems, and add to problems with our existing water and sewer systems, not to mention the noise pollution over the next 5 years or more. Easthampton deserves better. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. For a couple names online.
Yeah, you're gonna cut Kassam?
Yeah, please.
Had your hand up for a while.
Yes, hi. My name is Kassam, 340 Pleasant Street. Thank you for letting me speak. You know, I do like the development. I think it's going to be great for the city. But, you know, my only concern from a safety perspective for our customers is for when they're exiting Mountain View Street. I think it would only make sense to align the developer's access point with Mountain View Street. I think, you know, it would just work well for us exiting, and, you know, it's just think it will prevent some safety concerns for our customers when they're driving out. I mean, that's pretty much, you know, what I think that, you know, my only concern is. But besides that, I think that the development's going to be great.
Thanks, Todd. All right, we'll jump back into the room here.
There. Rachel Keenan Roberts, Ward 2 resident, registered architect, harvest manager at Mountain View Farm in town. Not going to talk about traffic, but As an architect, I understand the complexity of balancing open space preservation with the need for smart development. The city of Easthampton, through its master plan, open space plan, housing production plan, and zoning bylaw, has worked to synthesize these various priorities into a pathway that will keep our city resilient and flourishing in a challenging future. I believe the applicant's proposed development as currently submitted is not aligned with the city's vision, and that opportunities exist for a revised proposal that would allow the development to function as a partner in achieving these goals, rather than an obstruction on a path to a livable, sustainable city. The Pascomic Trust has already submitted a series of excellent documents highlighting the many ways in which the applicant's proposal conflicts with the city's stated development goals, and I'd like to underscore and expand upon some of their findings. The applicant is seeking permitting under the Smart Growth Overlay District zoning provisions for the commercial and mixed-use portion of the lot closest to Route 10, and under the general development guidelines for multifamily of the base zoning code for the residences on the remainder of the site. Addressing the latter first, the zoning bylaw clearly states that, quote, building sites shall, to the extent feasible, 1, minimize the use of wetlands, steep slopes, floodplains, and hilltops; 2, minimize obstruction of scenic views from publicly accessible locations; 3, preserve unique natural or historical features; 4, minimize tree, vegetation, and soil removal and grade changes; and 5, maximize open space retention. The Massachusetts biomap lists the rear parcel as containing both core habitat and critical natural landscape, primarily defined as aquatic core and aquatic wetland core buffer zones, and also composed of core habitat for rare species. The applicant's drawings show development and paving of this entire area. The applicant's plan shows not only a degradation of views from the road, but only 3 out of the 14 residential and mixed-use buildings shown on the site plan will offer any significant views from the units of the mountain, that's called Sierra Vista. Nearly the entirety of all parcels in question is designated by the state as prime farmland or farmland of unique importance. The applicant's proposal makes no effort to preserve any of this irreplaceable resource, which has been noted by government agencies ranging from the state, the city, to the United Nations as being in critical need of protection. The Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources says that in order to, quote, preserve the resilience of our agricultural economy and food system in a changing climate, there's a pressing need to expand the number of farms and farmland acres protected throughout the Commonwealth. While the site is not in the city's official aquifer protection zoning district, it sits on soils that provide a crucial recharge area to our sole source of drinking water. Large amounts of impervious pavement proposed by the applicant would represent the loss of a critical recharge zone. As the Pascomic Trust concept site plan submission shows, there are many feasible alternatives to the applicant's design, quoting the zoning language. Therefore, the applicant has not met the zoning requirement and is laid out in section 8.331 of the city's bylaw. While the portion of the proposed site that's governed by section 8 of the zoning bylaw is arguably the most critical and feasible to preserve, I urge the planning board to consider utilizing section 7.4131, adoption and amendment of design standards, to enforce the stated goals laid out in the city's master plan, such as creating a walkable, pedestrian-friendly highway business district by adopting design standards along Route 10, ostensibly for this very lot. Integrating Massachusetts Natural Heritage Biomap Core Habitat Map into the existing residential and commercial development regulations, the relevance stated previously, and implementing citywide smart growth principles and sustainable development practices in all city regulations and policies. Additionally, as stated in the master plan, the city already has the regulatory authority to rigorously utilize the existing conservation site analysis requirements in the zoning ordinance for planning board site review of residential and mixed-use open space developments to ensure community and natural resource protection goals are met. If there's a single site in Easthampton that deserves the added protection of this review, I believe it is this site. As stated in the city's open space plan, quote, a 2014 study by the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission identified priority areas for development and protection based on a GIS analysis of lands most suitable for smart growth and lands with critical and sensitive habitats and natural resources that would be most sensitive to the impacts of development. This classification includes the Tasty Top lot listed as a priority for protection due to water and wetland resources. The master plan notes that, quote, sustainability is about balance, building what needs to be built while saving what needs to be saved. The citizens of Easthampton have identified farmland, open space, and views of the mountain as features of the city that need to be saved. Additionally, we've identified affordable housing as an element that must be built. And I would add that I believe childcare facilities are also a needed resource in the city. The good news is the site in question offers opportunities to build and save at the same time, as illustrated by the Pascomic Trust's alternate site plans. These plans show that feasible alternatives exist, with the potential to check off nearly every box on the city's priority list while achieving most or all of the development's apparent goals. Not only is such smart development possible, it would likely afford opportunities for cost savings and regulatory allowances to the applicant. Due to the site's significant proportion of prime farmland and priority habitat and its adjacency to the existing conservation land along the Manhan, it may qualify for a conservation or agricultural deed restriction, which would offer tax relief or capital reimbursement to the applicant. And this aligns with another of the stated master plan priorities to, quote, continue to work with landowners to acquire critical lands in fee or through APRs and conservation restrictions and donations. There are many ways in which a more thoughtful design approach can afford benefits to both the applicant and the city while reducing the severe and permanent detriment a design like the current proposal would create. The city has invested a substantial amount of time, money, and other resources in creating a coherent development strategy. Until the applicant makes a significant effort to align their proposal with that vision, I believe the planning board should reject their permit application. Thank you.
My name is Teresa Guerra. I live at 33 Echo Lane in Easthampton, and I walk on Route 10 all the time. And it's taking your life in your hands. I'm walking on that little teeny sidewalk. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is I came to speak up for the Pascomic Trust because they're 100% right. This is a beautiful environmental gem in this city that they're planning on just anyway. So that was my original plan, but I was just studying the proposal over there, and it looks like they're planning on building a little city within the city, which is outrageous. So they're going to have like a self-contained little place over there for people to live and then just come out here. It's not even a part of the city. They've got businesses proposed in there, right? Am I wrong about this?
Correct.
Okay, so it's like a city within a city. They don't even have to come out, only to drive on our roads, right? I mean, that seems a little outrageous. Plus, they're going to be taking over our land next to the river, which is, we live in an age of climate change and global warming and who knows what else. And we're thinking of tarring over this whole area. I'm speechless. Anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Eli, anybody online?
No, I think that's everyone online.
All right, so the most important thing now is Rick's vacation plans. And I mean this, Rick, really, don't move anything. I mean,
Always not gonna move.
okay, good.
I'm away the 20th through the 27th. So the 18th could work.
So
I could do the 18th or the 2nd, I guess those are the dates
I mean,
available.
again, I think a lot of this is going to depend on, Carrie and the applicant's team and how long it actually takes them to do this. But let's be optimistic and hope that you get something in time to be here on the 18th to give some feedback.
Reasonable to you as the applicant?
I mean, I don't want to push you guys. The last thing I ever want is like to have everyone here on the 18th. That there's 50 people in the room. We're telling them we're going to be back the first week in May.
That's 4 weeks from today.
That'll be 4 weeks from today.
We'll have comments within 3 weeks, a week after Carrie gets back from her vacation, so it'll give them a week to look.
Okay, so
they need to look at it too. We don't want to get it the day of.
We'll give it to everybody a week before.
I did it the weekend before, so it has to.
Yeah. So that's good. So if we're assuming that it's going to be 3 weeks, and then Rick and the board and the public get something, again, if you get a 5,000-page document, we're not going to be able to get reasonable feedback on that in that meeting. But let's be optimistic and try to get answers. Jeff, you seem like you're gonna.
I'll just ask Carrie if you don't mind.
Yeah, and then I think that's a good call. I think as we ask Carrie, the expectation that we've always maintained is at a minimum, the materials need to be submitted by April 13th at like noon. We need like a target to make sure, because all parties need time to see the information. So based on that, maybe we could ask the applicants.
Well, yeah, but Rick's getting more time. That's a general rule. This one's a little bit more exceptional because I think it would have to be that. I think Rick's going to get at least that week, and the board is, frankly.
So that's what. So would we roll that back a little bit? Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm hoping. Is it sounds like Carrie's going to get us something. Well, Carrie, what did you think about Frank making promises for you?
Well, I am away until the 10th of April.
Okay.
But my staff will be working on this in my absence.
Let's not try to do this all at once. Let's work on. I mean, maybe we can get.
I think April 13th. Like my staff person is on the remote call also, so she's been keeping tabs, and we've been sort of chatting behind the scenes as y'all have been talking. That, I think it's not unreasonable that we could get the materials into the city by the 13th. But then that does not leave Rick very much time until the 18th.
Yeah, so why don't we do this? Why don't you folks try to get your response by the 18th, but we won't meet until the 2nd. And that will give 2 weeks for Rick and the board and the public to look at what you've done. And then on May 2nd, we can have more of a fully fleshed out situation.
I think that makes sense.
And I realize we're pumping things out a couple extra weeks for the applicants, but it's gonna, I think ultimately this might make things go smoother, but does anybody have an objection to that? Either Rick or applicant, or do something else planned for May 2nd?
Not that I know. And it would be helpful to get materials on the 18th, so I can, because that 2-week window, I will be away for a week.
Right, so that's what I'm thinking.
So I get a couple of days before vacation, a couple of days after to kind of digest what's.
I think that works. That works for folks. Okay. So
Carrie's saying yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, and if we have it earlier, obviously we will send it earlier.
Perfect.
So at that meeting, we're going to have a traffic update. Is the intention is also to come back with addressing the engineer's comments, addressing some of these other comments from the letters?
Yes.
And have an update. Okay.
Yeah, we will have that much, probably by the end of early next week. We'll have the engineer comments addressed.
Okay, great.
And I think like the applicant's entitled to propose what they want to propose and stick with what they want to stick with. I think we still have to do a site visit and walk this site, but I do think it's worth thinking about some other proposals that may or may not work that at least address some of these concerns that people have had. And I don't know if that's feasible or not, but I think if nothing else, maybe an explanation for why some of these other more consolidated compact proposals that we've seen are or are not practical or feasible, which I think is fair too. So I just think, we've got a chunk of time here, and I think it might be worth it to invest time into looking at whether this is the only thing that will work here or if there's something that might satisfy more of the concerns too.
Yeah, and maybe addressing some of the comments you heard, like using Colonial Way, confirming that you will not be doing that. I know you've said that already several times, but just to reiterate for the people that ask comments.
And I can keep reiterating, keep writing it down, but it can be very well put in the order of conditions that will only be accessed for emergency and be locked all the time.
Yeah,
I have no desire to access.
And I think we've discussed that it would have a knock box and that would be a lot.
I don't know what more to do.
Okay. All right. I just think all that, we've got a window of time here where it makes sense, I think, to spend some time thinking about what we're dealing with.
So are we doing site visits before that next meeting then?
That's the plan. And we're going to schedule in pairs to the planning department.
Okay. And is the applicant bringing us onto the site?
Yes.
Okay.
We're going to coordinate with them. Jeff, which
I just wanted to add that with this additional time, I think staff will provide another updated technical memo. So there was an article in the Gazette that did identify that the project does meet the baseline zoning requirements. So I will articulate that in a memo. And I think there are some other more subjective questions for the planning board to grapple with in terms of character. So we'll start to set the stage for that, the board to have those other items to review. And then I just wanted to share for the board's information that, the applicant is working through the Conservation Commission process as well. So that's compliance with the Weather Protection Act and the Stormwater Management permit. So just as information, the Conservation Commission signaling that they are going to seek a peer review of the applicant's information. Hopefully the commission decides at the next meeting and then a consultant will be selected. So we will hopefully make some progress with this review process, but the planning board often waits to hear how the Conservation Commission is ruling on theirs. So we will be getting closer to a point when the planning board would have the traffic information, some of the characteristics of the project in terms of compliance with zoning. And then hopefully at some point there would be, a decision from the Conservation Commission, all of which the planning board uses to render its decision. So I did just want to share that the Concom has indicated they're going to seek a peer review of that information to help them through their process as well. Great.
Excellent.
Just wanted to share that information.
Before we jump too further, Danny, I don't want to forget you online. Do you have any comments or questions, or are you good for now?
No, I'm good for now. And yeah, I have no problem speaking up if I have one. So
I know. All right. Thank you.
The motion to continue the Tasty Top Development LLC site plan till May 2nd at 6 o'clock. Seconded.
All right. Going to continue to May 2nd. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you all, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Harry.
We have another meeting coming right up, so if everyone that isn't staying for the next item that we have on the agenda, you could also respectfully. I apologize for the technical difficulties, everyone. It seems that they're now resolved, and I'm going to proceed for the second item on our planning board agenda today, 1776 Brewing. Per condition of their special permit dated June 7th, 2021. We're looking to review changes, replacement to a proposed band shed, and per condition 1 of the special permit to review the proposed changes to the patio area to determine if the changes are minor and thus do not warrant reopening the public hearing or are major and do warrant reopening a public hearing. That's our purpose today, the primary decision we're here to make. Good to see you again. Want to tell us all about it?
James, thank you for the introduction. I think that I'm going to let Herb do most of the speaking. I will let you guys know that we have between our architect, our site or sound engineer, and our contractor, we have developed a plan where everyone but one house benefits from the previous sound study, and one house gets slightly degraded because of it in relation to not having the sound study done. But however, that one house still gets a positive benefit from the resources that we're going to spend on the property in order to make everyone happy. So I'm going to turn this over to Herb, and we'll take it from there.
All right. Good to see you again, Herb.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Good to know. So I think Eric summarized it pretty well. So the analysis that we had done in the last spring, that involved putting a band shell essentially at the on the northwest side of the property, kind of in the middle of the property in the parking lot. And the idea was that it would be facing to the southeast. And I don't know if you all have actually have a copy of our report.
We do.
What I'm essentially looking at on the report is on figure 1 on page 2. So in that proposal was the idea was to basically focus all the sound, the current condition is the performers play against the northwest facade of the brewery, and the sound sort of propagates to the northwest, to the residents on Clapp Street, and to an extent to some of the residents on the northern part of Fort Hill Road. So the analysis that we did was we put a band shell, we face it to the southeast, so that blocks all of the sound going towards the northwest, towards Clapp Street. And that we estimated that would give about a 20 dB reduction in noise compared to current conditions for the Clapp Street residences and for some of the folks on the northern part of Fort Hill Road. However,
Can I interrupt at this point, and I'm sorry, I want to hear more. I'm interested, but Eli, do you have any ability to pull up what he's seeing so the folks at home can see that?
And go ahead and please continue, Herb. I wanted to try to visually let the folks at home see this.
Yeah. So now, because we're focusing the sounds towards the southeast part of the property, so towards Fort Hill Road, the building acts as a shield for that sound being directed to the southeast. But we did determine that there would be about a 1 decibel increase to some of the properties on Fort Hill Road close to East Street. So what we analyzed now was a slight modification to those plans. So rather than having the shed on the parking lot on the middle of basically towards the middle part of the brewery building, it's now being moved closer to the south, really closer to the western corner of the building. And rather than facing towards the southeast, it's facing to the east. And so what that winds up doing in terms of Clapp Street, looking at our analysis, in terms of the homes on Clapp Street, it doesn't make a difference compared to the other condition. They're still going to see about a 20 dB reduction. The benefit to the homes on southern part of Fort Hill Road is now more of the building is being put between them and the new shed. So now they're going to get so rather than having a slight increase in noise that was predicted for the old location, they're going to be getting a slight decrease in noise levels by a couple of dB. And so by a couple of dB, we're talking about, if you're watching TV, if you tap your remote 1 or 2 times, the down volume button on your remote, that's about a 1 or 2 dB decrease. Now, so the one property that is going to see probably a major difference between what we predicted last year and this year, and I shouldn't say a major difference, we're going to see a difference, is a number 35 Fort Hill Road. So now that our band shed is facing towards the east, it's facing a little bit more, some of that sound is being directed more towards that property than in the prior proposal. So that property is still going to get a significant reduction. It's just not going to be as high as we had predicted last summer. So last summer, we predicted that number 35 would be getting about a 20 dB reduction in noise with the shed facing toward the southeast. With the shed facing east, we're now predicting that it's going to be getting a reduction of about 10 dB. And a 10 dB reduction is still a significant reduction. That subjectively, that sounds about like cutting the sound in half. Another way to think about it is it's the difference between, you can imagine 1 kid screaming and 10 kids screaming. That difference in noise level is 10 dB. So we're going from 10 kids screaming to 1 kid screaming, or from 10 people talking to 1 person talking. That is about a 10 dB reduction. So it will be significant, it will be noticeable, but we're just saying it's going to be different than what we had projected with the other proposal. So then the other aspects of the proposal is there's going to be some absorptive material that's going to be put up against the western facade of the barn, reduce any reflections from going up toward Clapp Street or any other residences. And we're also going to put a barrier along the pathway of the main entrance into the brewery, again, to try to get a little bit of, knock down a little bit of that noise heading towards 35 Fort Hill Road to help them out a little bit. But that is essentially the summary of this proposal. And I tried to summarize that in the report that we submitted to the board. And I guess if you have any questions, happy to answer them.
This is a visualization of that?
Of the panels on, and I would like to know that those have already been purchased. So we're committed to the project.
All right. So thank you. I think that we need to open for some questions now. First off, before we start a debate as to whether this is minor or major, does anyone have any questions about the change in decibels, change in direction, these new panels? I know I have some about the materials. I just want to kind of go over that, but does anyone else have anything?
It looks like it's going to be a reduction in noise to me, except for the one home on Fort Hill. So.
I also have a question about the structure.
All the homes are getting a reduction. It's just that one house is not getting as much reduction as predicted last summer.
Right. Yeah, that's understandable.
Take it away, Chris.
Well, I just have one question about the structure itself. So the structure shows, you've got a bunch of really good 3D visuals of the structure. In some cases, it looks like there's a sliding door. I imagine that's for, I don't know, winter, closing it up to protect the stage. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And then in some, it's not. Are they just removable doors so you can have a larger stage? Like in some of these, I see a door,
Correct.
and some I don't.
Yes. Okay. Your statement is correct.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's my only question.
So I want to ask you, Jeff, was abutters notices given out for this meeting? No. And just out of curiosity, did any of the abutters, have you had any conversations with them about this change at all?
I have not, as requested by.
I'm not making any sense. I just want to know. Okay, so the issue to me here definitely is, as I look at these material changes, I see them as relatively minor. I definitely do. However, I very much want to know what the abutters feel. So I'm hoping we have at least one here. Is there anyone here that lives near the property? Do I see Laura Fisher online?
Yeah, Laura was here.
Would you like to? Would you be willing to give us your feelings on these changes?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't speak for everyone. My name's Laura. I live at 61 Clap. This is the first I'm seeing it. And I think the person it would affect the most would be the person who's not on the call. But I guess what I will say is it's really nice to see the applicant participating and investing in this. And I'm hopeful that however this rolls out, that we can enjoy a neighborly relationship. I don't know if the people who are closer than me are on the call or in the room though.
Okay. And the reality is, we already went through the permitting. We already went through this. It's really up to us to determine whether or not this is a minor change or a major. And from my perspective, there's only one component in this, and that's the one home whose reduction isn't quite what they thought they were getting. Does that trip major? That is a tough call. And I think where I'm sitting right now, based on what I'm seeing, the answer is no. I would have much preferred if that applicant was here to talk to them, but I don't see a reason personally to drag it out. I'd like the feelings of the board.
The decibel level that it increases, how much of an increase is that? Who's the Herb Singleton?
Mr. Singleton?
So with this proposal, nobody is getting an increase compared to the current conditions. Everyone is getting a reduction.
Oh. What he was saying is that there's a slight increase from the previous completed condition.
Oh, okay.
For that one house. So finished condition raises a little bit for one house.
Would have gotten a 20 decibel deduction, but instead is only getting a 10 decibel deduction. Did I say that right, Mr. Singleton?
That's correct. And the other home, last year we had said that the homes on Fort Hill were getting a slight increase. This time with this proposal, they're getting a slight decrease. So everyone is getting a decrease in noise levels.
Yeah. And in almost all cases, it's better than before.
All right, can I say something?
Please do.
It's going from a 20 to 10. What is it now before the shift?
Right now, and it's around, well,
If you're deducting
relative
20%.
sound levels, it's like 25 to 30. I don't know, I can't read that.
I mean, it depends on when they play music, and when we went out there, Mr. Singleton showed us varying levels of play at different locations.
I'm just trying to get some kind of comparison for what it is now and what the reduction is going to be. One's going to be 20%, the other's going to be like.
I can't remember. Herb, do you remember what it was when we were out there doing the assessments? Was it 70?
Well, so keep in mind, so when we were doing the demonstration last year, I was only at the patio. I didn't go along with the other folks to the other homes. So I don't know what the levels were at those homes. But I mean, you're getting, 10 dB reduction. That is it's basically, in terms of pure math, it's about a 90% reduction, which is kind of misleading. Decibels don't quite work like that. But subjectively, it sounds like the sound being cut in half. And as I said before, if you imagine the sound of, 10 people talking versus one person talking, that is about a 10 dB reduction. And it's probably, on your TV remote is probably something, depends on your TV, but probably something like 4 or 5 taps down on the volume down button. Don't take that as gospel, but that's just kind of sort of a rough rule of thumb. It's going to really depend on your TV.
Not a pretty big reduction.
Yeah, it is.
Pretty significant.
And everyone else is getting a bigger reduction.
Right.
It's just the angle of the vehicle. It's still,
Yeah, it looks like it's just going down the driveway. Is that right, Herb? Is that why it kind of spills over? It just kind of flows down the driveway there?
Exactly, yeah. It's down the driveway, and there's like a little gap in the hill, and it just kind of sort of a more of a straight line of sight. Well, not a line of sight, but it's just more of a straight path.
Yep.
And we did look at trying to build a higher barrier along that that existing berm around Fort Hill Road, and it just turns out that just doesn't work very well. Just berms and barriers work best when they're either very close to the source or very close to the receiving home. And they don't work very well when they're right in the middle of the path. And the problem is that area is right in the middle of the path, so it doesn't unless we were to make it 200 feet tall or something, it just doesn't work very well.
Right.
That's good to know.
Any other board members have questions? I've asked for, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I know I'm not a board member. There was a member in the audience who raised his hand about being in the proximity.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. I apologize. I was looking over here. Please, go ahead. Can you go to let your name and address?
It might be my fault, but I wasn't aware of any of this until I got an email this morning, and I wasn't able to find any of this information on the website. So that's probably my oversight. But
I don't think we noticed the butters in this case. Is that correct?
No, I never would have known about this. I never even knew about the previous. I knew about the plan.
I need you to give your name and address.
Oh, I apologize. My name is Jim O'Malley. I live on 9 Fort Hill Road, right by the light trail. Like I said, I wish I could have had more time to look over it, but I mean, at least finally looks like it's being done professionally. And I'm hoping, honestly, we don't have a lot of trust at this point because we feel we've been treated very badly. And this hasn't been handled professionally and really just contemptuously. I mean, we've been treated with absolute contempt. And so we don't have a lot of trust. And I mean, just to give an example, I mean, there's still what was supposedly Mr. Lane called a pedal park. And this had been used as a motorcycle, as a motorcycle stunt course that was no closer from one person's yard than, say, from that door down here to where you're sitting, is somebody jumping up and down 15 feet up in the air in a motorcycle. And Mr. Lane was calling that a pedal park and for motorized or for pedal bikes. And I looked up pedal bike. There's no such term as pedal bike. It's when a very small child graduates from one of those Strider bikes that you push along to a bike that finally has pedals. That's called a pedal bike. But nobody's going to be using a pedal bike there. And he had a bike course that he built behind.
I think at this point I should let you know that the board reviewed all that quite thoroughly when we passed a special permit. We discussed it at great length. And I believe we had, one of the motorcycle ones that was torn down, in fact, was taken down.
Yeah, it's all
torn down. It was demolished. Hold on 1 second, Eric, let me finish. So where I'm going with this, sir, is that we're really here just to see if these sound changes, if this one patio change and the way it's designed specifically, if that is a minor change. No other issues are really up. Before us.
You're right. I apologize. I guess, like I said, we've been treated very badly, And it doesn't look like it's being done professionally. And I just hope that it continues to be done professionally. And I hope that all the burden isn't going to be on us if it goes back to where things were. Well, I guess I don't have much more to say. I apologize for having not prepared something clearer to say.
It's okay, and I certainly hope that relationship improves. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public that wishes to speak? Going once, nobody standing?
Let me just make sure, I'm checking. I don't understand why the board didn't get a vote to talk on.
Because this is, go ahead. I was going to say that why we noticed them when we're doing, actually we don't, when we're doing, I can't speak. When we put out a special permit for site plan review, we notice. When we do continuances, we don't notice again. And when they come back for a modification, we don't notice again. And there's a cost to the city whenever we notice. So there's reasoning behind, the budgeting of these notices. We have to declare to the planning department when we write a condition or when we do a continuation that we want them to renotice. We have to give them instruction to do that for funding, which is very rare, but we do it very rarely.
So basically, this is the same thing as their modification, they're going to have a Glendale Road, a condominium. So they have a slight modification of the roof line.
Right.
So we determined not to go forward with it. We figured it was a minor change. That's how I think.
Exactly.
That's part of what the condition and the rule is set up so that the board is acting in like a business meeting of the board for you to hear from the applicant and decide. That's one of the critical things. You have the information that you need to have, and then you're deciding whether this warrants the re-notification, which is reopening the public hearing. So you get the first chance to review a change and determine the next step, whether there is one or not.
Yeah.
The notices to abutters is one of the things that happens with the public hearing is if you declare it to be a major change, then they would be notified. The public hearing would be advertised in the paper and that sort of thing.
It basically be like restarting the process.
Right, restart all over again.
Okay. So I think we had no one from the public, is that correct? So now it's decision-making time. I'm just going to go around the board and see if we're all online. Personally, I think this is minor. Danny?
Yeah, I believe it is minor in my opinion as well. And I actually like this design.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this design's better. I think it's more, it protects the residents of Fort Hill a little bit better. It helps Cloud Street better. It's overall a better design, so I'm approving it.
Aaron?
Thanks,
Yeah.
I concur. So minor change.
So then if that's the case, I think what I do have to
Yeah, I just wanted to get, the applicant just left, so Herb is still on the line, but the two things I was going to ask about is in the previously approved site plan, this area, the patio is on the side of the building. There's a drive aisle and there are parking spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So in the previous plan, it approved 20 feet as a separation between the parking space, the back of the parking space and the patio.
Okay.
And that's going to be important to just maintain that 20 feet. Because of the nature of this business meeting of the board, you can't add conditions. But the expectation would be that that 20 feet is maintained. If you look at the image that's of concern is
in Mr. Singleton's report, it does have a 20-foot dimension still, Jeff. It looks like they're just eating into the planting area that was proposed.
I appreciate that, Dan, and I
just want to keep in mind, sorry, but the plan that's in the report, that's just kind of showing that's based on one of the old site layouts from like a year ago. It's just there to schematically show where the shed is. It's not meant to be the current site plan. So I just want to clarify that.
So
it may or may not be the current site plan, which is my intention of that using that graphic was just to show it's specifically to show the shed was relative to the building. It's not meant to be indicative of anything else.
Thanks.
So because the applicant left, and as Jeff noted, we can't add extra conditions, we'll ask you, Mr. Singleton, to please note to Mr. Berzins that 20-foot, what do you want to call it, a buffer distance? I don't know, Jeff? Clearance.
Travel lane.
Travel lane, it is our preference that it remain.
Well, and
What are the-
Jamie, what are your thoughts on just having a final site plan that's revised that shows what's actually the end of the story here, instead of just this is more of a schematic, I would say, than a site plan based on Mr. Singleton's clarification. So wouldn't we want to have something on file or on record that actually is at the end of the rainbow site plan?
So I think if you're proposing that we additionally request the final site plan be provided to the planning board, I'm not sure that the applicant's planning to do an update to the site plan. However, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
I mean, I sort of doubt they are.
But is the condition that there must be a 20-foot travel lane? So I think that seems in the current application, they still have to comply with that.
It's an imperfect situation that we're in because the previous site plan, which was baked into the permit, shows a different configuration, but it shows the 20 feet. So it would take some extrapolation to just be sure that the 20 foot, so when you add the band shell in this new location and you bump it out, because it's consuming the 5 feet that was going to be proposed for everybody. I was just looking for assurance via a plan that it's going to conform to that 20 feet. The other thing, if I may, because I don't know how it'll affect your decision, but the berm that was discussed at the front, so it's not current. I didn't see it in the Herb Singleton memo, and it's not shown on the plan, but it's near the entrance. There was previously a container with a elevated platform on it, which was a source of contention previously. But the question would be to get some level of certainty as to how high that berm is going to be. It may already be in existence, but I think as Herb suggested, like if it just keeps getting taller and taller, they keep trying to mitigate the sound. I think the board, we should know how tall the berm we might be expecting.
Well, I don't think he's proposing a berm.
No, I think he wasn't.
It's just a natural berm that's there now, I think.
No, my understanding was that this was going to get built up with dirt to increase.
In the original proposal, you mean?
No, in the revised discussion before.
Herb, can you tell us about that? Is there a berm being built?
Not for noise control reasons.
Oh, can you tell me where you saw that, Jeff?
I guess it came through discussions early on with the applicant, and maybe I am wrong that there's no berm.
I mean, we had toyed around with using a berm early on, and then when it didn't work, he abandoned it. I don't know if maybe he may have communicated that at some point, but when we looked at a berm, it didn't work. So it was my understanding is Eric didn't want to deal with it.
So the understanding now is that there will be no berm. Is that correct?
That it might, at least for acoustical reasons, there will be no berm, as far as I'm aware.
Eli had the actual conversation.
Yeah, my recollection is it was started for sound mitigation. Then the applicant had a conversation with Mr. Singleton, found out that it didn't really do anything and abandoned the idea, and is no longer pursuing it.
Okay. Which brings us back to the other item you talked about getting like an updated site plan, which we can request, but we can't condition at this point. And the 20-foot buffer, I'll just pass on to you, Mr. Singleton, because Mr. Bersons has left the room. Please remind that it's a condition in the original permit that 20-foot distance has to be there, so it's expected.
Well, okay. I just want to say, I mean, I'm not a planner, I'm not a civil engineer. I mean, I can tell him, can I tell him to contact you for clarification, just so nothing gets lost in translation?
Yeah, no, I understand. We don't have any other communication method. I mean, we can either change our minds now, but the reality is,
I just don't want to screw something up and he does something and then I get blamed for, and I get my license pulled because I did something incorrectly.
Jeff, tell me if I'm wrong. It remains in the condition, therefore it must be applied.
Can you I think if you put it on your computer.
Applicant is reappearing on the video, but it's not a condition. So it's something where the plan shows, it does show a dimension of 20 feet. So you have to be careful that has to be extrapolated by the building commissioner would have to make sure that they're looking at that. I am thinking that in our past practice for a decision like this, especially when Curtis was here, what we would do is provide a simple memo to indicate that the board reviewed X, Y, and Z materials on such and such a date, and and it would be a memo. So we could articulate in a memo that the board identify the importance of maintaining the 20 feet from the back of the space to the van shell. It's just not as solid as a condition or a plan, but I didn't see the applicant on video.
Yeah, the applicant is, Mr. Parsons, are you
Hey,
there?
I'm here. Hey, Jeff, I'm here.
Jeff brought up the point about, actually, why should I restate it? Go ahead.
So the discussion after you left was just about the drive aisle. So the side of the building where you have the patio and you're proposing the van shell, the previous permit required 20 feet between the back of the parking space and anything. It was the van shell, it was the arborvitaes. So we were just discussing the importance of being able to maintain that 20 feet. So,
absolutely. I believe that Eli and I discussed, and he agreed this morning that it was actually more than the footage that you just stated.
We just wanted to be extra clear because I think at the stage
just confirm with Eli.
He's here. I mean, at the stage of getting a building permit, we just wanted to make sure that it's important that someone's actually going to go out there with a tape measure and measure between the back of the space and the van shell, and it's going to have to be 20 feet. So
Jeff, I invite you to come out and measure it out yourself.
Building inspector. Okay.
Right. Okay. That's fine. We just want to make sure we have the discussion.
Thank you.
Situation as well over here.
And yeah, there's a question of, we've been told that there will be no berm for sound mitigation toward the front. You confirm, just restate, are you or are you not building a berm?
We are not building a berm. It does not add anything, does not add any benefit. If it added benefit, we would be happy to do so. We are spending a great deal of money in order to appease all of our neighbors. By the sound study, I think that we are really doing pretty darn good.
Okay. So, do you still?
So I'm satisfied. I mean, I think it's just an important point that this is the plan moving forward. So adding a berm later would be something that the board would review.
Jeff, I'm not adding a berm.
Okay, let him finish. Okay. All right. I think we can move on.
I think we understand.
Does anyone have any other questions or concerns? No. In that case, I'm looking for a motion to see this as a minor change.
I move that the applicants that came to us today on 1776 Brewing for the review of the revised ban shell is a minor change and does not warrant reopening public hearing.
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any against or abstentions? I think it's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Burthams.
All right, everybody. I don't have anything else, so I'm looking for the last motion. Unless you have some sort of news or events or anything you want to. No.
Make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Seconded.
All right. All in favor? Aye. And we are done. Thank you very much.
And just,
Thank you, everybody.
1 second to turn off the recording before.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.